I do want to give a little disclaimer. As I told you last week, we are the series on church growth. I'm basing it out of the book by Kim Hemphill, The Bonsai Theory of Church Growth. The book's been around a number of years. It's a great little book. And while the words are mine, the thoughts, at least the chapters, each message is based on one of the chapters in the book, if that helps. And so this is where we get the idea for each of the messages. I want to look at verse in chapter 4 of Acts, verses 32 through 35. Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And great grace was upon them all. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold, and laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. May God add His blessing to this reading of His Word. I think back to a few years back, and I was pastoring a church. Was fairly new there, pretty small church at the time, and one of the families that joined our church, we were talking about church membership and their interest in joining. And I told them, I said, we're kind of small right now, but we're looking to do great things, and I'm sure the Lord's going to bless us with growth. And they had small children, which was something I thought they'd want to hear. And they said, hold on a minute. Said, we didn't come here because we wanted a church that was growing. We like a small church. It reminds us of the home churches we came from, and it's comfortable. We will know all the people, and they'll know us, and our kids will be special to all of them. And, it occurred to me, and as I talked to more and more people, that was not an uncommon sentiment. That people like the feeling of familiarity. I mean, people basically are not crazy about change, are we? We like things to be comfortable. We like things to stay the way they are when we're happiest. The problem is we can't all be happy at the same time, can we? No, of course not. Well, but I think that's the attitude a lot of people have about church. I just had never thought about it at that time. We'd like for it to stay this way. Well, we give a lot of lip service to church growth. But then when somebody new comes into the church and wants to take over a role of leadership, sometimes we try to put the reins on them and hold them back instead of turning them loose and letting them lead. Or someone has a new idea. Well, hold on. Can you say it? We've never done it that way before. You've heard that before, haven't you? We've never done it that way before. I think that's one of the favorite sayings I've ever heard in churches. We've never done it that way before. I'm not saying that to be critical. That's just a fact. We're creatures of habit. We like things to be comfortable. Just today, I was at lunch, and I ran into a buddy that I hadn't seen in a long time. And he asked me, he said, how's the church? And I told him things were going well. And he told me where he was going to church, and he said, we're just struggling. We're struggling to get by. We're trying to hang on. And he said, well, I guess that's the case for most churches nowadays in our community. And he stopped and he said, no, probably everywhere in the United States. And yeah, that's the attitude that a lot of us have about church growth is, we're not worried about church growth. We're just struggling to hang on. We just want to survive. Well, going back to the bonsai tree, does it make any sense to uproot a tree, to prune back its roots, and then to replant it? It doesn't make a lot of sense unless you're dealing with a bonsai tree. See, these little trees grow in these little pots, and they require at least biannual root pruning, if not annual root pruning. And to do that, you simply remove the tree from its container. You brush out the dust, the dirt, the rocks, whatever may be mingled in the soil. And then you prune the roots. You see, because of the limited size of the pot for the bonsai, the root structure has to be limited as well. The tree will become root bound if you're not careful. So the small size of the container limits the tree's ability to gather the nutrients it needs. So it's essential for the roots to be maintained to a suitable size for the container. Now, all this sounds simple enough, but we need to understand that root pruning is the most traumatic time in the life of a bonsai tree. The tree is placed at tremendous risk when its roots are pruned. And I think it's true that churches too understand that pruning the roots will keep them small, will keep them from growing. See, often churches do that with an understanding that they're involved with root pruning, or it's a process that will ensure their growth doesn't happen. They're afraid maybe to move on and to go forward. So how does this differ from the first century church? Think about the church in our text. Our text tells us that the believers were of one heart and one mind, and that they shared everything they had with each other. They made sure that anyone among them who had need, that those needs were met. Now, to contrast this unity and concern among Christians, I want us to take a look at a few examples of how root pruning can create a situation where churches won't grow. Can, in fact, create a bonsai church. Remember, the bonsai can look real healthy. It can be very pretty. But it continues to stay small. Maybe comfortable. Maybe not lacking. But it doesn't grow into a full-size tree. One thing that a church can do to stun its growth is we'll call enrollment pruning. Now, I've known Sunday school classes that took great pride in having 100% attendance. But I have a secret to share with you. It's pretty easy to accomplish that. If you just delete people from the roll who haven't been in a few weeks, you can reach 100% attendance pretty quickly. Think about it. It sounds silly, but it's exactly what a lot of Sunday school classes do. What's more, many churches do it as well. They go through their roll every year, and they'll purge those members who haven't attended faithfully or haven't given regularly. So isn't that what we just did? No, we undertook a directory project, and in doing so, we were able to identify a number of people who had joined other churches or had moved away or had died, and they were still on our rolls. And those people were removed. But only people who were removed at their request or for one of these reasons, because they had joined another church, for instance. So we have to be very careful. I had a neighbor who was a member of a really big church in Raleigh, and he was a deacon there, and he was telling me about one of their policies, he said, we don't have many people that don't give like they should. I said, well, explain why. I said, why do you think it is? He said, because if you go through a certain period of time throughout the year and you haven't given what you've pledged you're going to give, he said, myself or one of the other deacons will come to visit you. They sound like enforcers, right? I mean, they actually go to visit people at the beginning of the year. Everyone pledges to give a certain amount of their income, a tithe at least, and then if they haven't given that by a certain period throughout the year, and then as they are checked up on throughout the year, then the deacons go to see them and remind them that they owe the church some money. That's the way they did it at their church. That's not the first church I've heard of that does that. I'm glad that we don't. I think that giving's between us and the Lord. But a story is told of these two men who were shipwrecked, and they washed up on this remote island out in the Pacific Ocean. And one of the men began to scream and cry, and he was just all falling apart. And the other man said, "What in the world is wrong with you?" He said, "We're going to die. We don't have any food. There's no water that we can drink, and there's no shelter. We're going to die out here." And the other man said, "Hold on. We are not going to die. I can promise you that. In fact, I guarantee it." He said, "What are you talking about? How can you guarantee that we are not going to die out here?" The man said, "Look, I make $100,000 a month, and I tithe to my church every month. I promise you, my pastor is going to come find us." Now, unfortunately, many times churches and even pastors have the attitude that members like that are worth finding, while other members who maybe don't attend as regularly or give as regularly need to be pruned from the tree. Don't get me wrong, I'm concerned about those people on our rolls who are inactive or sporadic at best. And the best way to deal with these cumbersome, if you will, extra roots is not to cut them off and not to see them as cumbersome or extra. The best way to deal with them is to seek them out, restore them to fellowship, encourage them, love them, meet their needs, because usually there's a need that's being unmet if they're not regular in their attendance. And it's here that we should learn a lesson from the bonsai. When we prune away the dead roots, or what appear to be dead roots, on a bonsai tree, those healthy roots that are real close by, they tend to get damaged. They tend to end up being damaged. And so our primary goal as church members, as a church, as Christians, is not to boast about percentages present, but to reach the unsaved in our community, to care for those who are part of our fellowship, who maybe have fallen away in some area. See, we're not caring for anyone when we purge them from our roles. We simply lose contact. That means that we lose opportunities to minister. We lose opportunities to fulfill the Great Commission. See, the Great Commission is not just about getting numbers in the church. The Great Commission is about making disciples. And those were the last instructions we had from the Lord. When He ascended back into heaven, before He left, He told us to go and make disciples. Not just to baptize people, but to make disciples. And that involves a commitment to people, long-term commitment. A commitment that can be painful at times. But it involves a commitment. And it's a lot more than baptizing somebody and forgetting about them. We need to minister to their needs. Now understand that I'm pointing a finger, or not pointing a finger so much as I am trying to remind all of us that we have to do everything we can to discover ways in which we can minister to all people in our church, all people in our community. And when we begin to understand that the people who may be on our rolls but are inactive or unconcerned, that they're people for whom Jesus died, then we begin to treasure any and every opportunity to have contact with them, to reach out to them, to love on them. So if we prune them from the role, on the other hand, whether it's by some official action or just simply forgetting that they exist or ignoring them, if we choose not to seek them out, then we're forfeiting opportunities to touch their lives for the sake of Jesus, for the sake of the kingdom. So let's don't prune them. Instead, let's go find them. Let's reach out to them. Let's encourage them. Let's love them. And while enrollment pruning is common in churches today, some do it every year. Some more often than that. But it's not the only method that's used to keep churches from growing. Another popular method is resource pruning. More than any other group of people in the church, the finance committee, the stewardship team, these people have the power to prune back new growth or to allow for new growth. See, all it takes to prune back growth is to cut financial resources. Now, hear me clear. I'm not suggesting that any church spend money for the sake of spending money. I'm not suggesting that churches spend beyond their means. But even in times of hardship, we have to be careful about what we cut back on. We have to make sure we don't cut back certain resources that'll hurt or stunt the growth of the church, that will lead to even greater financial hardship in the long run. Every church in the world has the financial bump in the road. They all go through a slump. It happens during times of natural disaster. It happens during building programs. It happens when the economy takes a downturn. It even happens during summer vacation months when people are away a lot. But even during times of financial slowdown, we have to remain faithful to the Great Commission and remember that God will provide our needs. Sometimes it just takes reminding our members that we still have to pay the power bill when they're going to the beach or the mountains or wherever it is they go. That we still have obligations. But all of it combined means that there's an element of faith involved in what we do as not only individual Christians, but as a church. An element of faith, an element of faith where we step out and say, you know, Lord, you have called us to this ministry. And if you've called us, you're going to equip us. We're going to be obedient. We're going to follow you and do what it is you've called us to do. Now, we don't know how that's going to look financially, where the funds are going to come from, but we believe you're going to provide them. And when we get to that point and we step out in faith, He will provide. If we're obedient to Him and we follow through in faith, He will provide. How can you promise me that? I can promise you that based on His Word. I can promise you based on my own experience. He will provide when we are obedient to His calling. So when times are bad, every effort should be made to provide the resources that are needed for growth. Other non-essential budget items may need to be cut back. Can't help but Think of some things I've heard on the news this weekend with the government shutdown. What exactly is a non-essential employee? If they're non-essential, why are they working for the government? But we have to look for ways that we can cut back and continue to do that which God's called us to do. So what about that group of people that have their hands on the purse strings? It's vitally important to give them the encouragement, the prayers that we need to give them to lead our church in this area. And it's vitally important that they have a vision for church growth, and not just for survival, not just for getting by, but church growth and fulfilling the Great Commission. Pruning the financial roots will greatly hamper the natural growth of the church. We have to be careful. And I'm thankful for the leaders we have in this church, for the job they do. I've been in a number of meetings in the past year where I've seen these members pray over needs and do everything they can to provide for the growth of the church. And you and I need to pray and be faithful to these visions as well. May we never lose that vision here at Robberdale, to be a growing church. A growing, as I said last time, it's not about numbers. It's about reaching the lost. It's about reaching, as long as there are people in our community who need Christ, we need to be concerned about church growth. It's that simple. And finally, consider some other ways that we might prune the roots. These are what I would call subtle pruning techniques. Forms of root pruning that may be not as obvious as pruning the resources or pruning the role. One is the congregation that expects the staff to do everything. This is a way to prune the roots of a church. This is a form of root pruning, if you will. And I can tell you from a personal experience that pastors cannot do it all. In fact, there are some things you can do much better than we can. It's a joy to be involved in every ministry area of the church, but we can't be real effective at all of it. And if we are involved in all of it, then we neglect something that we're called specifically to do. So lay people are needed. Lay people are needed to help with things like visitation and teaching, ministering to the sick and shut-in, helping with administrative duties even. This last couple of weeks, we've been installing a camera system. We voted a while back to install a camera security system. And, I enjoy doing that kind of hands-on stuff. That's something I really enjoy, and it gets my mind away from all other cares, and it's really a lot of fun for me. But finding the time to do it was the problem. And Mitch and his boys stepped up and said, we'd like to do this. And man, they got to it, and I'm glad, because I can't climb around in these ceilings and walls like those skinny little boys can. It amazed me what all they've got done. They've run a lot of wire in this building the last couple of weeks. And of the 32 cameras, we've got about 20 of them up and running already. And the others they should have up pretty shortly. If anybody'd like to help them with that, let Mitch know you'd be willing to help him. And see if he can set up a time to get with you, because I know now that looks like everybody's going back to school tomorrow, so I know they're going to be getting busy again. Well, those are the kind of things, while I enjoy doing it, it helps me tremendously when somebody like that steps up and says, I'll take care of that. Because then I can focus on what I was called to do. You didn't call me as your pastor to do camera installation. And so I can devote more time to studying and preparing, to ministering, to visiting. It's impossible to be an effective preacher if there's no time left in the day for study, for preparation. It's impossible to visit new prospects or to minister to those who are sick in the hospital, having surgeries, if we're running endless errands and doing other duties that maybe somebody thinks are important, but they really don't have anything to do with the ministry we're called to do. I'm not pointing any fingers, but I'm reminding us that we have to guard against allowing our church to develop any kind of attitude that would say, well, we pay the pastors, let them do it. We pay the pastors, let them go make visits. We pay the pastors, let them take care of all the jobs that need to be done around the church. The fact is, there are few churches in this world who could afford to pay a pastor minimum wage for the hours that he already puts in, if you consider especially all the unnecessary things that we try to do. So we have to be careful to utilize other people within the church. That's why we all, Paul said we're like a body. Each one has a part to play, and each one has its own gift. And we all work together to advance the Great Commission, to obey the Great Commission. But if a church develops a mindset, well, let the pastors do it, then it cuts back on the effective caring ability that a church has. It restricts the growth of the church. Another subtle way that churches prune the roots is by failing to keep a sufficient number of prospects. What am I talking about? I believe every church should have at least one prospect for every church attendee. So if we have 100 people here, if we have 200 people, we need at least 100, 200 prospects. That sounds difficult. Think about it. Who in here doesn't know someone who doesn't go to church somewhere? Who doesn't know someone who doesn't need the Lord? Certainly all of us know someone who isn't involved in church anywhere or who needs Jesus. And if you were to just go within a half-mile radius of this church, you would probably find hundreds of people who are unchurched and who are lost without Jesus. It's that serious of an issue. They're all around us. And so we need to have these people. I want to challenge you to do something. I want you to think about 3 names. The names of 3 people that come to your mind first who have no relationship with Christ, no affiliation with the church in our community. They don't have to be within a half mile, but they can be. They can be anywhere in Richmond County, for that matter. Think about those 3 names and write them down on a piece of paper. Put them in your Bible. Begin to pray for them every day. When you have your prayer time, pray for them, that the Holy Spirit will convict them. Not only that, spend time with them. Make opportunities to be around them and to share God's love with them. Reach out to them and minister to them. Meet their needs as you see them. And invite them to church. It may sound silly, but every study that I've seen over the last 20 years, why somebody came to church, the number one reason they gave was simply this: because somebody invited me. Why did you come to our church? The preacher was way down on the list. The youth program was way down on the list. The Sunday school was way down on the list. Why did you come to our church? Even the style of music was way down on the list. Why did you come to our church? Because somebody invited me. That is simple, isn't it? But think about it. Chances are you're here today because somebody either brought you to church or invited you to church. How many of us woke up one morning and said, you know, I heard they got a good-looking preacher down there. I think I'm going to go to that church. I know nobody does that around here, at least at this church. But think about how many people are asked by a friend, would you come to church with me? Would you let me meet you at the parking lot, or I can pick you up and bring you? And we'll go in together and we'll go have lunch afterward. That's a prospect. Somebody that we can reach out to and invite to church. And I think we'll be amazed as we identify these lost and unchurched people at how many of them would like to be in church with us. Because what I've found in the people just since I've been here that I've invited to church, most of them say something like this, you know, I've been thinking about getting back into church. You know, I've been feeling like I really needed to get into church. You know, I need to get my children into church and my family. Only a handful of people say, you know, I don't have any use for that. And some will, but not many. Another great way to reach out to prospects. I'm going to throw this one in for nothing. When you see someone in church on Sunday that you don't recognize, introduce yourself to them. Invite them to lunch. If you're going out anyway, invite them to come along. And if they've got children, it's real easy. You know what you do? You go up to those children and you say, do you like pizza? How many children don't like pizza? Some, but not too many. Do you like pizza or do you like chicken nuggets? All children, I think, like chicken nuggets. And once you get the children on board, what are the parents going to say? No, we can't go and let you feed our kid pizza. Invite them. Would you like to be a part of a community of believers that's similar to what we read about here in Acts? Where there's unity and compassion. Until we get to heaven, we won't be there. But the closest we can come, our best chance for peace and harmony is in a Spirit-filled church. A place where there's a vision for growth, a vision for fulfilling the Great Commission. And what I mean is this. Whatever we decide to do, whatever decisions we make, we filter them through this. Does this have anything to do with what Jesus called us to do in the Great Commission? To go into all the world, to make disciples, to baptize new believers, to teach them. Those are the things he talked about in the Great Commission. And if we filter every decision we make, you know, and if we come back and say, you know, this really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's really all about me. It's really all about my preferences or, you know, my small group's desires. Has nothing really to do with the Great Commission. Then maybe we need to say, no, let's don't do that. But if we can honestly say, yeah, this is all about fulfilling the Great Commission, then we need to pray and ask God to provide. And we need to step out in faith and do whatever it is that He's calling us to do. Is this what we want out of life? Listen once again to the text. Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked. For all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold, and laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. So, if we want to experience that kind of growth, that kind of love and fellowship and community, a step in the right direction would be for us to carefully refuse to prune the roots of church growth.